Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Nirvana with Nav. Before we get into today's session, there were a couple of questions that I received, so I'm going to answer those first, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this week's session. My friend Andy asks, in what aspects of your life have you found meditation to help you? It's something I've always been interested in, but never really got into. One way I can answer that question is that meditation enhanced the spiritual element of my life. Now, I want to be clear in the sense that I'm not relating spirituality to religion. In my mind, religion is about a connection to an external power, whereas spirituality is a connection to an internal power. Meditation has helped me slow down, become more compassionate and aware, which I guess has probably made me a bit nicer. There's ways to maybe be 5% better. We don't have to think about absolutes, but there's this analogy, I think, that even drops in a bucket will eventually overflow. And in that sense, giving yourself just 5 minutes a day is a good place to start, but you will realize that's probably not enough. It's definitely not enough. What I think you have to understand, though, about meditation is that it's not something you just get into. There's different ways to experience that experience, but it's something that we fundamentally need in our daily lives. Think about something like eating, actually tasting the ingredients, slowing down your bite, actually chewing your food. You actually get to taste that. It's weird because there's so many times where you want something, and then as you're eating it, you're thinking about the last time you ate it because it was such a good memory. And in that moment, are you even really eating what you're eating as you're eating? Or walking. No one likes a slow walker, I get it. But if you walk just like 10% slower, it just opens up the possibilities to things that you might have missed otherwise. And that's the real meditation practice. I was asked a few general questions about psychedelics, and although my experience from the last episode was quite in the deep end, I think that conversation is best started in the shallow end with cannabis, as it is now legal across most of North America in one capacity or the other. But it's still such a stigmatized topic to talk about, especially in a culture where parents can probably drink a bottle of wine in front of their kids, smoke a cigarette in front of their kids, but the line is drawn at cannabis. And that's in part because of an education system which for well over 60 years reinforced into society that cannabis was a gateway drug. There's no way around that. That's what we were told. And just a couple of years ago, governments have now allowed the public access to cannabis, not just THC and recreational marijuana, but CBD, truly therapeutic medicinal properties. And so if there is any place to start this conversation, it's through the healing property of psychedelics, and specifically starting with CBD and what it has to offer through its anti-inflammatory properties. If you've had a negative experience with cannabis in the past and that's what's causing you resistance, the best way I can explain it in more relatable terms using alcohol is that if you were introduced to cannabis through one of the traditional methods, which I consider a pipe, a bong, or a joint, that would be similar to introducing someone to alcohol with shots of tequila or some other drinks of hard liquor, as opposed to just offering someone a beer or a half glass of wine to get someone familiar. So, over time, with more informed education, I think people will come to notice the benefits of responsible psychedelic use. But given that cannabis is a drug, there's always a given that it might not be for everyone, especially if someone is susceptible to some of its pre existing conditions. Sure, it's a plant, but accept it for what it is legally classified as. And with drugs, there is a responsible use that can add value and enhance your life, and irresponsible abuse that can have all the justified criticisms that have come as a result. If you're interested in this topic and want to read a bit more, I wrote 2 articles on my blog about how to go about having a clean and positive experience with cannabis while trying to clear up some of the dank air regarding the stigma and skepticism that surrounds the drug. So if you're interested in reading that, you can check out my blog, theextrovertedintrovert.ca. And with those 2 questions out of the way, we can get started with today's session. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. Said by Marcus Aurelius in Book 7 of his Meditations. In my past few episodes, I've spoken a lot of Buddhism, but today we're going to travel 6,500 kilometers across the world from Nepal to Rome to discuss Stoicism, which developed independently of Buddhism, yet share some striking similarities between one another. In the context of history, the Buddha would have been born in the 4th or 5th century BCE, so about 500-600 years before Marcus Aurelius, who was born in the year 121 AD, lived to be about 60, and governed over Rome as emperor for about 20 years. One of his greatest contributions is essentially his private journals, which have been deemed the Meditations. And it's his private notes on Stoic philosophy. And at the root of that philosophy is the belief that becoming a clear and unbiased thinker present allows one to understand the universal reason, or what was known at that time as logos, nature. And so that quote, think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. It's about coming to the present moment. I think it was Shakespeare who said, "A coward dies 1,000 times before his death." And it plays really well with this thought from Marcus Aurelius. What is a coward? It's defined as someone lacking courage to do or endure dangerous or unpleasant things. I think we often relate courage to bravery, but the word courage has a deeper meaning to it. The origin of the word comes from the heart. the innermost feelings. And so in that sense, a coward is someone that lacks heart. It's not just an adjective, someone who's lacking bravery or lacking courage in that sense, but it's an attack on your character, essentially. And to relate back Shakespeare's quote there of a coward dies 1,000 times, when we lack heart, we're going against our inner being. Another way to look at that Shakespeare quote is your identity might die 1,000 times, but your being will only ever die once, your physical being. And if you want to break it down even more, don't think of it as death. You're shedding a layer of your identity until all there is you. And all these layers, they're the different ways that we see life, that we experience life, that we limit life. Think about how many times fear has held you back from a moment in life. How anxiety might have triggered a response that you weren't ready for. How in a really crucial moment in life, you might have been elsewhere in your head. All of these doubts and triggers are the layers that we shed, or that we try to shed. I always try to find a lesson in my mistakes to the point where they're no longer mistakes and just lessons. Because you can't make a mistake in life. I mean, you can, but you can't. There's mistakes in your actions, but life is an experience. Our identity is a culmination of our mistakes. But some of those mistakes still carry significant weight, and that weight is what stops you from living in the present moment. I see these layers firsthand when I'm working with some of the athletes I coach. Some of you know I coach a high school wrestling program. But when you're working with kids, it's a lot easier to see these layers come to the surface. So many times before even stepping onto the mat, you'll see kids defeat themselves. And when they step onto the mat, all those layers have added weight to them. You can see it manifest in their bodies physically. Any thought left unchecked will manifest in the body in one way or another. I mean, me personally, I've had my moments before stepping onto the mat. I've had countless moments. I've been in combat sports for well over 10 years now, and I've had my fair share of adrenaline dumps, anxiety attacks, unchecked nervousness. I think it's not so much that we are ever truly afraid of death. I don't think death is something to be feared, it's something to be understood, like science. I think it's more about the fear of failure that manifests itself as small deaths that occur. But what is failure? Failure is simply just being unprepared for a situation. We can set ourselves up for failure. We can involve probability into it. We'll have higher chances to fail if we're unprepared. But then we're so quick to attribute success to luck. And at the end of the day, luck is just a combination of being prepared and being present. One of the bits of advice that I always try to stress to my athletes is the confidence in being prepared. Too often in scenarios, we think about the external environment. What if this happens? What if that doesn't happen? What if this doesn't work? But you've prepared yourself. There's no need to conjure up scenarios that will not happen, won't matter if they do happen, because all that does is lead you into a state of panic, where your mind goes elsewhere and your body's left on autopilot to defend for itself, however best it can. What this then all boils down to is once again being present. In one of the audiobooks I was listening to, it was comparing the first day of a North American school education to a Buddhist monk school education, and how in the first day of a Buddhist monk school, the kids are taught how to breathe, which is weird when you first think about it. But when you understand that the breath is the only thing that stays with us from the moment we are born to the moment we are dead, you have to understand how to develop that relationship. And the Buddhist monks were able to figure out that that relationship had to be reinforced early. I mean, just think about how often, even as a kid, as a child that you might have been, when a teacher said your name during the class attendance and you said present, were you? Are kids nowadays? I'm reading a book called Meditation is Not What You Think: Mindfulness and Why It Is So Important. And one of the chapters that really blew my mind was talking about ADD, attention deficit disorder, and how 50, 60 years ago, ADD wasn't really a thing. It didn't really exist, but how it's become this era's most widespread and prevalent dis-ease. You know, in the last 15 years, since the birth of the smartphone, we're just constantly having information thrown at us with no real understanding of what to do with it, how to interpret it, what to make of it. And then we're just kind of told to continue living with all that is going on around us. And I think philosophy was introduced as a way to find an approach to living life irrespective of who you are and what you believe. Because I think the teachings of both Stoicism and Buddhism have shown me that philosophy isn't just a weird university major, but a way to approach life with a deeper meaning and greater sense of confidence. And it doesn't matter if you're entering a boardroom for a presentation, stepping on a mat for a wrestling match, going on a first date. It's that each moment is best lived when you can think of yourself as dead, with no thought of what if, but with an attitude of so what. Because we only have one life, so it's up to us to live it properly. Although I wanted to continue where I left off on my last episode, I wanted to just go on this tangent about the dilemma of living presently and just think freely on the topic. On an individual level, it's a lot. We haven't evolved for this level of information, of sheer data. Just think about the change that has happened in culture, society, and the way of living in the last 2 generations, the last 50 years. There's so much input from the entire world instead of just our small worlds. And I think I want to end this session with the 5 Buddhist remembrances. I am subject to aging. There is no way to avoid aging. I am subject to ill health. There is no way to avoid illness. I am subject to death. There is no way to avoid death. And this plays on a Stoic idea of memento mori. It's a reminder of our own mortality. The 4th remembrance is everyone and everything that I love will change, and I will be separated from them. This parallels another Stoic idea that I'm probably going to butcher called Premeditatio Malorum, which expresses the impermanence of the world and the premeditation of what's to come. And lastly, my only true possessions are my actions, and I cannot escape their consequences. And this relates back to the dichotomy of control, that the only true thing we ever have control of is ourself. We'll shed some more layers in the next session, and if you ever have any questions, please feel free to ask me. You can reach me through Instagram at Nirvana with Nav, and I'll be happy to get back to any questions that get asked. Feedback is also appreciated. If you guys like some background music, let me know. If you rather prefer it silent, that works too. Anything helps. Peace.